Alaska has now come and gone with Trump and Putin. The Washington meeting between President Trump and President Zelensky has come and gone. All the European leaders who dutifully came over to try and, as a group, compelled Trump to their side and to push him into their direction. All that is now in the books. And now we have to look for, and then what? What is going to be the result of all this? Is there going to be a ceasefire? Are there going to be security guarantees that the United States may end up giving? And what about the Russian side on this? How are they viewing all this? And what is the plan coming up next? What is the likelihood that this actually finally leads to an end of war negotiation and this bloody, pointless war finally comes to a merciful end? To try to answer some of those questions, we have one of our favorite guests on, Larry Johnson. Larry the Shirt Johnson, former CIA analyst, head over at sonar21.com, always putting out great stuff. And in fact, we're going to talk about some of the stuff that you posted here recently on sonar21.com about, you say Trump still fails to understand Russia's fundamental reason for the special military operation, but hey, at least he's trying. Welcome back, Larry.
Hey, man, always glad to be with you. Glad you're off the road. You survived the trip.
I did. And it is good to be back in the studio. I got to say, man, doing these things from hotel rooms and hotel lobbies, it's not ideal.
So not ideal, but you cared and you did a good job.
I appreciate that. We can't miss a lot of this stuff that's going on, especially when so many things are potentially happening. A lot of activity. The real question is, what's it going to result in? Because I'll just tell you, kind of my off the cuff has been that there's lots of movement, but no movement, if you know what I'm saying, because a lot of action, but no movement. Better way to say it, because I haven't seen so far, with only a couple of exceptions, which we'll touch on in a second. I haven't seen a lot of movement on the positions of the various forces here, and that's Trump, Zelensky, Europe, and Russia. How do you see all this stuff so far?
Yeah, there's still the failure in the West, particularly with Trump, to understand what is the problem. Why is Russia involved in Ukraine right now? It boils down to a simple fact of NATO expansion. But if you listen to Trump, he talks about it almost as if it's just a personality issue between Volodymyr Zelensky and Vladimir Putin, that, I got to get these two together so they can like each other, and then this will all be settled. It's not a personality clash. Or, well, let's talk about land swap. It's just, they give up this piece of land, and you take that piece of land, everybody be happy. This is not about Russia taking territory or Russia wanting to conquer all of Ukraine, despite that's what's been frequently said on this side of the ocean. This is about NATO's unrelenting expansion towards Russia since 1995. And this is part of a broader framework in which they want to defeat Russia or compel Russia in some way to become aligned completely with the West, and in order to attack China. This is ultimately, the big picture, this is ultimately about going after China, but they recognize Russia is an obstacle to that. And now it's become a bigger obstacle. So with the failure to understand that this is about stopping NATO expansion until that principle is grasped, this war is going to continue. It's not going to stop. And let's focus on the positive. I think I'm one of maybe a handful of Americans that have spoken to both the foreign minister Sergei Lavrov and the deputy foreign minister Sergei Rybkov. And in talking to the deputy foreign minister Rybkov in December of 2023, he lamented and was really pressing on this point. He says, we don't have anybody to talk to. And he was reflecting back on if you call it the good old days of the Cold War. He said, even during the Cold War, we still had diplomatic contacts. We still had the foreign ministry was able to talk to people at the Department of State, and there were contacts between the two governments. He said, we don't have that. Donald Trump has now changed that. And the Russians, Lavrov has been very clear about that. He said, now at least we have somebody to talk to. And so I give Donald Trump full credit for that. They're talking, but Trump's not necessarily understanding yet.
Well, and in fact, to kind of underscore that, I guess on Fox and Friends yesterday morning, Trump did a little phoner interview where he kind of characterized how he thinks this is. And kind of to your point, it sounds like he's thinking, look, there's just two dudes that they just don't understand each other better. I'm going to help them out.
I hope President Putin is going to be good. And if he's not, it's going to be a rough situation. And I hope that President Zelensky will do what he has to do. He has to show some flexibility also.
See, that's all it's about, Larry.
Yeah.
All you got to do is just be understandable, reasonable, and show a little flexibility. This can all be over with quickly. How do you see that?
Yeah, starting in 1997, when NATO, with the U.S. being the lead in this, began set up operations at this military base in Western Ukraine called Yavoriv. So from there going forward, if you right now there are 32 countries in NATO, and if you go and ask, of all those 32 countries, which ones have hosted the most military exercises, and you'll find that in addition to those 32, there's one country, not part of NATO officially, that has hosted more NATO military exercises than 26 of the 32 nations, and that would be Ukraine. And when you know from your own experience, when you conduct a military exercise, it's like a Hollywood script. You got to have a villain. Who's the villain? Well, it's always been Russia. So we spent 30 years running exercises all designed to figure out how we're going to attack Russia. Oh, sometimes they're couches. Oh, we're just acting defensively. We're waiting until Russia attacks us. And Russia hasn't been attacking Europe. That's been the biggest straw man, but that's the justification for it. So when Russia finally pushes back and said, enough, this is going to stop, all of a sudden, they're the bad guy, and we got to stop them at any cost. So this is, Trump's failure. He thinks he's above this. And you know what? I think he genuinely doesn't realize that when he was president in his first term, from 2017 to 2021, the United States and NATO conducted more military exercises against Russia using Ukraine than any president before him. Okay. And it was while Trump was president that someone at DOD thought it was a great idea to fly B-52s along the Black Sea coast of Ukraine. Yeah, that'll get the Russians calmed down. And we have our strategic bombers flying right on their doorstep. Trump doesn't understand this. And, he's, like I said, he's going along thinking, no, these two guys just don't get along. I could be the peacemaker. I'll bring them together. That's not the issue.
No, it's not. And one of the other issues, which was also highlighted in last week's meetings, especially the one with Zelensky in the White House, a lot of people were watching that, first of all, to see, is there going to be a repeat of the February fiasco? Of course, there wasn't. I think he'd been coached up enough on that, not the least of which is by the European leaders who were sitting right outside the door, as it turns out. But Zelensky was asked one really hard and very important question, and his answer was a little, shall we say, evasive.
President Zelensky, are you prepared to keep sending Ukrainian troops to their deaths for another couple years, or?
So the question is, are you going to keep rolling your kids out there to die for another year or two if it goes that long, or are you willing to end the war by having some of your territory ceded over to Russia, which they already control? And of course, he didn't answer that question, and instead just talks about trilateral meetings, etc. What do you make of that?
Well, regardless of what he thinks, the reality is they've got a manpower crisis looming in Ukraine. They do not have enough trained military personnel to man the entire front, and so they're in a position where they're pulling troops from one location to send them to another location to reinforce a position that's under attack. And as soon as they pull them out there, then the Russians advance in that sector because it's been weakened. But again, we saw it there in the premise of the question that this is all about land and territory. And, again, Trump and his entire team seem to fail to remember that in April of 2022, Russia was willing to accept a Ukrainian proposal that would have left Donetsk and Luhansk, the two territories that comprise the Donbass, as part of Ukrainian territory. Russia was willing to make that deal. They initialed off on it. They were simply the requirement was that the rights, the freedom, the language of those people had to be protected, and they wanted some security guarantee. Russia wanted security guarantees. Well, that was rejected, and so in the aftermath of that rejection, the Russians then held elections in September of 2022, in which the people of Zaporizhia, the people of Kherson, and of Luhansk and Donetsk all voted to become part of, rejoin Russia. And that those votes were taken, presented to the Duma, and the legislature said, amen, they're now part of Russia. It's enshrined in the law. So this, as Trump has intimated that, maybe that we could freeze the line of contact in Zaporizhia and Kherson, and Putin's not going to agree. He can't agree to that. He can no more agree to surrender those territories than Donald Trump could have turned around to him at the Alaska summit and said, you know what, Vladimir, I'll give you Alaska. You can have Alaska back. Just give up those two territories. No, it's not going to it can't happen. So it's like people need to wake up that this isn't about sorting out territorial games. This is about eliminating NATO's presence and threat to Russia, and getting rid of the people that profess views that are very commonly associated with a paper hanger that lived in Berlin during the 1940s.
I think I remember something about a mustache. I can't.
Yeah.
I can't remember his name right offhand, but you mentioned that Ukraine it doesn't understand the actual dynamics here about what they continue doing. I cannot presently vouch for the authenticity of this, but there's a lot of reports floating around just before we came on the air here, and one of our readers has also seen it, that someone hacked into the database of the Ukrainian armed forces and says that there are 1.7 million dead or missing Ukrainians here. Now, again, I can't validate the truth of that, but that seems plausible to me based on what we see on the battlefield. What do you make of that?
Oh, yeah, no, I saw that report as well. Well, yesterday, Russia and Ukraine did an exchange of the Russians turned over the bodies of dead Ukrainian soldiers, and the Ukrainians turned over the bodies of dead Russians. The Ukrainians turned over 19. The Russians gave the Ukrainians 1,000. So, yes, 1.7 million. And that's been the pattern since the peace talks started and they agreed to start returning the dead in their possession. It's been at that ratio, 1 to 20. For every dead Russian soldier, there are 20 dead Ukrainians. And it should be surprising because throughout the last three and a half years now, we've seen the kind of disparity where Russia is firing 7 to 8 times the number of artillery shells that Ukraine is. When you're firing those and they hit, they're more likely to kill people than not, which just means there's going to be a higher casualty rate on the Ukrainian side just from the artillery. But then add to that, Russia's dropping these FABs, these bombs that glide in and can be guided to a particular location. Ukraine's not fighting back with anything like that. So that's one more, if you will, method of inflicting damage and casualties from that. Then you add in the various missiles, the Iskanders, the Kinzhals that Russia has at its disposal. And then we get to drones. And again, Russia has a decided advantage on the drone front. So naturally, when you've got all of these other things potentially capable of killing or wounding people at work, that side is going to suffer more casualties, which is exactly what has happened.
We do, yeah, and that unfortunately that just is not acknowledged or accepted. In fact, it's almost it would be comical if not for the bloody, deadly
Yeah.
seriousness of it. But they say on the Western side is that it's the Ukraine that has a 1 to 10. I've seen in a couple places. Casualty advantage over Russia, that they're inflicting more on Russia by a factor of 5 or 10 to 1, et cetera, which belies all the logic and physics that you just talked about with the firepower. But that's kind of where we are. But before I move on to the next section here, I want to get your view on something that you kind of mentioned here, that you said, well, Russia can't give up, freeze the line of contact in Zaporizhia and Kherson, because there's a lot of territory on the other side that Russia has said is already in their constitution. Zelensky also cites the constitution. He says right before this meeting, he reiterated, I think it was like the night before, he reiterated that I can't give up any of this constitution because my constitution prohibits that. So they both can't coexist. So what's going to determine who has to violate their constitution?
Well, it's the same thing that happened at the end of World War II. Hitler wasn't around to violate his constitution because he took himself out, but the remnants of his government had to sit down and surrender and basically give up on their constitution, have a new government, a new constitution. And frankly, I think that's where Ukraine is headed in this, that this war is not going to be settled through a negotiated peace, some sort of peace talk, some negotiation. It's going to be settled on the battlefield. Russia is not only in the process of defeating Ukraine, but it's also in the process of gutting, demilitarizing, defanging NATO. Despite all of NATO's tough talk and bravado, the fact of the matter is NATO is they're in no position whatsoever to challenge Russia. And what's been fascinating over the last 2 weeks, a meme has been circulating in the West, getting a lot of attention. Russia's in trouble economically. Their economy's collapsing. And it's like, okay, people saying that, stop showing your stupidity. Number one, go back and look at the 1990s. That was a collapsed economy in Russia. They had 2 periods of hyperinflation. 7% of the people were in the middle class. Everybody else was impoverished. The life expectancy for men fell from like 63 to 56. Yeah, that was a collapse. And yet Russia survived that. So they're basing the, quote, current collapse on the fact that, Russia's economy is only growing at 1.5% GDP. Yeah, because their central banker imposed measures to control inflation starting last October. Those measures have worked. It did cool the economy down, but now she's cutting the interest rates and the economy's, reviving. But in all of this, Russia's got a debt to GDP ratio of between 14 and 19%, depending on the source. Whereas,
like that.
Whereas in Europe, France, its debt to GDP ratio 115%. The UK's debt to GDP ratio 100%. The United States debt to GDP ratio 125%. And people that aren't good with math or finances says, what does that mean? It means that if you make $100 a month, you're spending $125 a month. That means you're going to go bankrupt at some point. You've got more money going out than you got coming in. That's what it means. And then when you look at the current economic growth from across Europe, all the NATO members, in Germany, France, the UK, they're all, quote, growing at 0.5 to 0.2%, less than 1%, which is basically they're stagnant. So wait a second. All of these economic midgets are going to take on Russia, and they're all going to pony up billions of dollars to buy weapons from the United States on a credit card, I guess. I mean, it's just the insanity of this. Yeah. It's so divorced from reality, and yet none in the media are talking about this. And none of the policymakers are talking about this.
And all they end up doing is just reiterating the claims without actually examining any of the things you just did, which, yeah, that'll work for a while, but at some point, reality is going to impose itself over your spin, and we'll see what's going to happen. That speaking of reality being trying to be spinning it over. Wow, this next comment here is something that I did have to play it twice to see, did I just hear what I think I heard? I have made a number of comments about Steve Witkoff that have been fairly positive since he's been kind of Trump's sort of personal chief diplomat, aside from the Secretary of State, both in the Middle East and in Russia. Witkoff was, in fact, the one that kind of started this whole process here when he went to visit with Putin on the Wednesday before the meeting in Anchorage, et cetera. But he was on Fox News yesterday, or I think this weekend, and asked, just how important is this meeting here, and just how much pressure did Trump actually bring to bear to bring Putin onto the table? If you can, watch this.
Do you believe this peace is attainable? And is it because of what Donald Trump did by convincing the EU to buy our oil, by putting tariffs on India, by arming Ukraine and upping the ante with NATO? Is that the reason why Putin finally came to the table?
Those are all the reasons, Sean. The president, and me and you have discussed it, has this uncanny ability to bend people to his sensible way of thinking. And he does it each and every time. I've never seen anything quite like it. And I've been around some master deal makers. He is the legend as far as I'm concerned. And his policy prescriptions are so pragmatic, so sensible. And in a distorted world, he's recalibrating it all. It's simply remarkable. And every single leader that I've met in my travels, Sean, they say the same thing as I do. Every single one of them.
Every single one of them. Surely all those European leaders, they all are just enamored with President Trump. And President Trump forced Russia to the table by just being pragmatic, his force of will. What do you make of all that?
This would be a great Monty Python skit if it wasn't so serious. Look, even Witkoff is living in this delusional world. He talked about, the tariffs on India. Well, yeah, how's that working out? Well, what's happened now is India has been energized to forge its closer ties with China. And maybe I said tongue in cheek that maybe this was a secret Donald Trump plan to win the Nobel Peace Prize by doing something so egregious that it would bring India and China together, and then he'd get credit for the peace process. But the tariffs haven't worked on India. Number one, to alter its behavior, to say, we're going to distance ourselves from Russia. Just the opposite. And in fact, before the Alaska summit and after the Alaska summit, and in the aftermath of the conversation with Trump on Monday, Putin calls Modi and says, "Here's what's going on. Let me keep you up to speed." The same with Xi. He keeps Xi informed. So what the United States, what Donald Trump has accomplished, instead of being this master deal maker, he is actually bringing the other side into greater unity. And it's unfortunate that Witkoff is such a sycophant to do that level of ass kissing, which Donald Trump requires, because Trump is, and I've got this from people that have met with him on a one-on-one basis, and more than just one person. Trump, when you're with him one-on-one, he's so desperate to be liked. He wears it on his sleeve. He doesn't hide it. And that really reflects an underlying insecurity. And so when you got that kind of person, the only way you stay in good graces, hey, boss, you're the best. Nobody does it better than you. Danny, I got to tell you, there is no podcaster out there better than you. You have got it hands down, and we like to hear stuff like that, but I mean, it is actually true. You do a good job, but my point is that when you get this kind of sycophancy involved with international relations, and you fail to appreciate that, these people, particular Putin, yeah, he wants to work with you, but he also understands that you're a flawed individual, and he's not going to sacrifice Russia's interests just to please you.
Yeah. So the idea that President Trump has this force of will that's so strong he can bend Putin to his will against his own interest.
Right.
I've never seen anything like it. I mean, that is just beyond absurd to even suggest. It's not comical. It's embarrassing to be able to make that statement. But it does lead to a bigger issue because a bunch of people. You're talking about. We've seen it in President Trump's cabinet meetings. I mean, everybody, when they go around the table and the cameras are in there, they have to just brag up one side and down the other, President Trump, whatever he's doing in their area. It can't just be about what's happening. It's got to be that you are this amazing person and all this kind of thing, all the way around. Well, others have learned that too. So you've seen Mark Rutte, who has just become the master of lathering up Trump and bragging on him every time you turn around. Putin does the same thing. He recognizes what motivates Trump, so he also brags about him a lot here. Well, now then that's also seeping into those who have at other times are against what Trump has been doing to try to bring the war to an end. The minute that Trump said something about U.S. providing security guarantees to Russia, brother Jack Keane jumped right on the bandwagon.
What we really see is the president has established genuine momentum, Martha, and not only the obvious unity that those leaders were displaying, but they're now exhibiting his resolve and his determination. And I know for a fact that is the task that has been given to the Pentagon. And so the chairman of Joint Chiefs is personally involved. The Supreme Allied Commander of Europe, who's a U.S. general, is involved in that process. They are meeting with all the chiefs of defense of the countries that are willing to participate and find out what it is they're willing to put into this. And Zelensky's team, defense team, is also participating, and that would also drive what the United States will contribute based on what others are putting into the security guarantees. And the reason these are so critical, because obviously we have a peace agreement, the security guarantees go in place, and they prevent Putin from attacking. What he has done time and time again in violating ceasefires or violating peace agreements. That has been his method, and we have to take that away from him and provide deterrence.
Okay, so aside from him lathering up Trump and saying he's this brilliant, all this kind of stuff, but let's get into the key issue there. There is talk, and he said and he does have contacts at the Pentagon at the highest level, that the Pentagon is actually starting doing planning on whether in the air or potentially even boots on the ground as a physical deterrent to Russia. What do you make of this? Because Trump had been completely against any kind of security guarantees up until now.
That will be World War III. Russia is not going to allow NATO troops to be based in Ukraine. They're already taking out facilities that have had NATO, reportedly have had NATO personnel at it. They've blown them up. There has been no reporting in the West of these casualties, and I think that they're trying to keep that under wraps best they can. But Russia will not, under any circumstances, allow NATO to impose any kind of no-fly zone. If those aircraft are over Ukrainian territory, they're going to be targeted. They'll be shot down. And Russia definitely has the technology to do so. If troops are brought in, they will be attacked and destroyed. And then, NATO may want to say, oh, that's an Article 5 violation, and they'll try to declare war on Russia. NATO can't. I mean, they can say, okay, we're going to go to war with Russia, but in terms of actually being able to marshal the manpower and the resources to do so, they don't have it. They're playing strip poker. They don't have any clothes on. Okay, So you start off naked, you lose.
See, your
Yeah.
NATO naked is a really unpleasant image. So let's move on.
Yeah, I know. Keir Starmer naked. Oh my Lord! Yeah, you got to wash our eyes out over that.
I do actually.
Yeah. So I mean that they're pushing this, but I wanted to also point out at that meeting that they had with Trump in the White House on Monday, you saw both Merz and then Macron and then Starmer. They all kept making that pitch for the ceasefire, and Trump actually kept, to his credit, he shut them down. They're like, nah, we don't need the ceasefire. We're going to go for the full peace agreement. Von der Leyen was pushing her thing. He shut her off. Hey, thanks for sharing. Nice contribution. We're not going to go down that path. She was willing to play up on the supposed children that Putin has kidnapped. Again, more projection by the West, where what the West is doing to children, they always accuse Russia of doing it. But, that's a whole nother topic. So the Europeans didn't get anything out of that.
Well, in fact, for those who may not have seen it, here is the exchange between President Trump and Chancellor Merz.
The next steps ahead are the more complicated ones now. The path is open. You opened it last Friday. But now the way is open for complicated negotiations. And to be honest, we all would like to see a ceasefire, the latest from the next meeting on. I can't imagine that the next meeting would take place without a ceasefire.
Well, we're going to let the president go over and talk to the president, and we'll see how that works out. And if we can do that, I will say, and again, I say it, in the 6 wars that I've settled, I haven't had a ceasefire. We just got into negotiations, and one of the wars was, as you know, in the Congo was 31 years long. Another one that we settled last week with 2 great countries was 35 years going on, and we had no ceasefire. So if we can do the ceasefire, great.
So we don't really need to do a ceasefire, but the Merz just kept going on to I think Gary, in the show he did yesterday, I think he said like 700 times want a ceasefire. He was trying to get it done there, but Trump just blew it off. And so I want to get to what Trump said there about those wars at the end in a second. But first, let me just focus on his comments there about there doesn't need to be a ceasefire, and Europe's begging and pleading to get one. What do you make of that?
Well, this would be Minsk 3. So let's recall that Minsk 2 came about as a result of the militias in the Donbass had surrounded and were on the verge of defeating the Ukrainian army in January of 2015. And the Europeans hurriedly got in place a ceasefire they convinced Putin to persuade the militias to stop fighting. They got a ceasefire. They signed the Minsk II agreement. And then, as Angela Merkel later admitted, this was all ploy. This was a complete scam. Their intent was to get the ceasefire so that they could rebuild the Ukrainian military so that it would become a more potent threat against Russia, which is exactly what happened. And Putin himself later admitted, I got played. I got fooled. But he's not going to let that happen again. So all they want this ceasefire for is they recognize the desperate straits the Ukrainian military is in. They need a pause. They need time where they got a ceasefire where they can actually take the recruits and get them some training. Because right now, when they try to do training at various bases inside Ukraine, they keep getting attacked by Russia. Russia can hit every single bit of territory inside Ukraine, and has done so. So it makes getting a formation of soldiers out in the open pretty dangerous.
So let's take a look then now at now before I leave that, because it keeps coming up again. Trump has solved 6 wars, so he says, and he's trying to get number 7 because by his own account, he really wants that Nobel Peace Prize, etc. But what do you make of his claims like the Congo? He said going on 30 years, or the Armenia, Azerbaijan. Has that really been solved? Did he really get into that? Does he deserve credit for those?
No, not at all. So he takes credit for India and Pakistan settling that war, and the Indians have said not only no, but hell no, you had nothing to do with it. So they completely reject Trump's claim. That that is one other item that's on their we're mad at Donald Trump list, in addition to the tariffs, because they said he's trying to take credit for that. Azerbaijan and Armenia, they haven't been fighting now for 2 years, 3 years. In fact, one of the reasons that it is believed that Armenia was willing to sit down and do this is that they're mad at Russia because when they were at war with Azerbaijan, Russia didn't come to their aid. Now, the fact that Trump sat down on that, I bet before that meeting, if you'd held a gun to his head, he couldn't find Armenia and Azerbaijan on a map. Okay, yeah, he wouldn't, much less spell them. This is part of a deep state project to use the Caucasus. The Caucasus run from Georgia, Armenia, Azerbaijan, and they're right on the southern border of Russia. This is all part of a long-standing intelligence project to weaken and destabilize Russia. That's all it is, and Trump was simply playing a role in that regard. You'll notice that day before yesterday, Russia hit the Sokar oil terminal in Odessa. Sokar oil terminal is owned by Azerbaijan. In fact, it accounts for about 15% of their GDP. Russia completely took it out. That facility was used to supply fuel, gasoline, oil products to the Ukrainian army and to Israel.
So I'm curious why, because I had read that those stats you just mentioned there, and so it begs the question to me: why would Russia have left that alone for 3.5 years and hit it only now? It seems like it would have given them tactical utility from the beginning. Why only now?
Because they were trying to maintain decent relations with Azerbaijan, and now this was said, okay, this relationship's over. This is like if you've got a cheating girlfriend or a cheating boyfriend, and you still hope you can just reestablish the relationship, but finally you come to the point, you know what, we're never getting back together, and so I'm getting rid of the ring or whatever. Yeah. Whatever obligations you had, it breaks. And this is Russia telling Aliyev, the president of Azerbaijan, hey, you've now crossed the line. There's that clever acronym in the end, on the social webs, FAFO. Well, this was an FAFO.
Now they found out.
FAFO moment for Azerbaijan.
Okay, well, let's move on to the other half of that now, because really this is kind of tied together. Because what we have done so far is everything has been, what does the Europeans say? What does Zelensky say? What do Americans say? What do other supporters from the United States say, et cetera? Nobody is talking about what the Russians say. Yeah. And so let's take a look at that half of this. First of all, here's Sergei Lavrov. I think it might have even been from this morning, talking about the state of diplomacy.
Kai Kallas, who is the chief diplomat of the European Union, so high representative foreign policy matters. And after the Washington summit, she said that the European Union is not going to trust any agreements achieved with the Russian side. So that's why the European Union will continue to support the Ukrainian armed forces, and the European Union will push for more sanctions against Russia, no matter what agreements are. This is not diplomacy. This is degradation of foreign policy.
Yeah. So I mean, he's saying, look, you guys have to deal with some reality here. It sounds like, but they're not.
Yeah, Lavrov he really is a gifted diplomat, and there's really no one else like him in the world. Maybe Wang Yi in China comes close in terms of experience, ability to deal with other countries, speaking multiple languages, but he doesn't play games. he's not he's not a liar. Sometimes, the joke at State Department when I was there was the definition of a diplomat is someone who's paid to lie for their country. Okay. But in Lavrov's front, he's always very direct and laying out this is our interest. This is what we want. He's definitely pushing back against the European Union, not even willing to engage Russia. So when Ribkov that I mentioned earlier talked to lamented, we haven't had anybody to talk to. They were also including Europe in that list. Now they're talking to the United States, but they don't have anybody that they can talk to in Europe.
It's funny you mentioned that statement there about diplomacy. But some people view in the United States as a professional liar for your country. I talked to Ambassador Chaz Freeman, who's had decades of experience in the U.S. He said that it used to be the art of convincing somebody else to do what you want them to do and making them feel good about it.
Yes.
That's actually diplomacy. And it appears to me, you tell me, because you've had engagements with him, it seems like Sergei Lavrov is trying to enter into that definition.
No, yeah, definitely. And Chaz, he was a giant. He was still active when I was there, 30, 35 years ago. But, Chaz is right on that part of the diplomacy is understanding what the other person wants, what's motivating them. Why are they upset? Why are they angry? So it requires a level of empathy where, ideally you can be empathetic without sacrificing your own values, your own principles. So, but instead, what we've seen from the standpoint of the United States, particularly under Biden with Blinken, is a complete lack of empathy and this attitude that we can do whatever the hell we want and you're just going to have to put up with it. That's not diplomacy. That's bullying. It's
attempted bullying. It didn't work out very well.
Well, yeah. So this is where, the Russians are sincerely trying to work with Donald Trump to see if there can be a negotiated settlement.
Yeah, and I've got a couple of other things here from Lavrov to really reinforce that point. You mentioned at the outset of this show that Russia is and will ever remain consistent on their positions, one of the key ones of which is the root causes of the war.
Yeah.
President Trump and his team, especially after the meeting in Alaska, began to approach the resolution of this crisis much more deeply, understanding that it is necessary to eliminate the root causes, what we President Putin constantly talked about. And one of these root causes is precisely the security problem of Russia, related to the fact that for decades the commitments given to us not to allow NATO expansion to the east were grossly violated. President noted several times that after these promises there were 5 waves of NATO expansion. Moreover, when they say, well, it was promised verbally, nothing of the sort. It was promised on paper in the form of political declarations signed at the highest level at OC summits.
So even though we don't like it to, as Minister Lavrov said there, listen, this goes back to the 90s. When you kept telling us you're not going to advance to the east, and then 5 rounds you kept going in, and he's saying that has to be solved before there can be an end of war negotiation. What does that mean in practicality?
Well, in practicality, let's start with Poland and Romania. The United States deployed, I believe, 3 years ago, the Aegis. So the Aegis anti-missile system that has been on ships. They've now moved it to land. So there are two of these units are in base. One's in Poland, one's in Romania. The problem is that they represent a threat to Russia now because they can fire a Tomahawk cruise missile from those launchers. They don't, normally they're equipped with a different kind of anti-ballistic missile, but they can also take a tomahawk. Problem from Russia is they can't look at it and know whether it has a tomahawk in it or not. And the reason a tomahawk is relevant, it can carry a nuclear warhead. The other missile that goes in the Aegis can't. So if you're a Russian military planner, you got to assume that those are being loaded with nuclear-tipped tomahawk missiles. So this is where Russia's saying that, hey, look, bringing in the Baltics to NATO was completely unnecessary. Bringing in Finland, Sweden, because Russia wasn't threatening them. What's fascinating, though, Danny, is when you look at the actual numbers that are involved. When you look at the Baltic states combined, they've got like 16, 17 million people between Estonia, Latvia, and Lithuania total. That's the population of Moscow. So my point is they are inconsequential numerically. Same with Armenia. Armenia is like 3 million. Georgia, where the United States is working heavily to try to overturn the government there, 2.8 million. Azerbaijan has got like 10 million. So what the West is doing is trying to infiltrate NATO into these small countries, but nonetheless use all of that territory as a way to attack Russia. And Russia understands that. And that's what they're saying. No, this has got to stop. NATO expansion makes no sense because we offered to join NATO and you wouldn't let us in. And so NATO is being used simply as an excuse, if you will, to justify a $1 trillion defense budget. That's what it's for.
And it's ironic that even last week there are still comments from some of these European leaders that they still expressly, Starmer was one, want NATO on the table for a potential future into Ukraine, even now. Yeah. Which I think many in the European intentionally said that, knowing that's a bitter pill that Russia could never swallow. I think probably in part to try and sabotage any move towards peace. But one of the other things that I want to mention, and I know we're getting low on time here, in terms of, how could we get to a negotiated settlement? Because Putin has said in his conversations with Trump, as he said all along, we are still actually interested in a negotiated settlement as long as some things are taken care of here. But one of the things that Russia has been opposed to all along has been any kind of security guarantees.
Oh, you froze there. Hello.
We'll get him back. Let's see. It usually takes a minute.
There we go.
There
we go.
Yeah, I got to get my router fixed, I think. Sorry about that. But now all of a sudden we have Russia saying we'll contemplate a security guarantees, but as Lavrov says here, with a new wrinkle.
When in Washington, these delegates, they talked about the need to start with developing security guarantees for Ukraine and at the same time security guarantees for Europe. No? Starmer, the English Prime Minister, mentioned this, as did many others, but no one ever mentioned Russia's security. Although the OC documents I quoted are universally developed and adopted by consensus, they require security in a form that will satisfy everyone. Bimas Beseto. So far, this arrogant attitude towards international law, towards those promises that are often deceitfully made and recorded on paper, is felt in the approaches of these individuals to the current Ukrainian crisis. Without respecting Russia's security interests, without fully respecting the rights of Russians and Russian-speaking people living in Ukraine, there can be no talk of any long-term agreements.
So he said, without, number one, no one's listening to Russia. No one's talking about Russia's security guarantees, only about Ukrainian and European security guarantees. But then, and Gary, if you can throw that full screen up there, just before we came on the air here, apparently Lavrov now is also saying, hey, how about China? He says Moscow won't agree with collective security guarantees negotiated without Russia. Russia will accept it if the security guarantees to Ukraine are provided on an equal basis with participation of countries like China. And he says it's a complete non-starter for Western allies if they just want to say security guarantees for Ukraine, but nothing for Russia. So what do you make of that? Because I almost wonder if, just like some of the Europeans were saying, yeah, we still want to keep NATO on the table, that Lavrov is saying, yeah, sure, we'll do security guarantees as long as you can be okay with Chinese troops in Europe on the border between the two of us. What do you make of that?
Yeah, well, he's feeding them back what they're trying to feed him, and he's doing that to show, because they'll reject that. They won't accept that at all. And that makes his point, that this is not about seeking a genuine peace settlement. This is about controlling, using Russia as a wedge to ultimately go after China. And so Lavrov understands that this is not just about dealing with Russia as a threat. This has much broader strategic purpose. Go back and look at a paper that was written by Aaron Wes Mitchell in the National Interest. It was published in August of 2021. And that was based on an article, a paper he wrote for policy planning at DOD that had been delivered the previous December of 20. And in it, it lays out very clearly that the goal is to provoke a war. Remember, this is August of 2021, 6 months before the start of the special military operation, that the West is going to provoke a war with Russia and defeat Russia, and in the defeat bring Russia so that it has to have an alliance with the West, that then we can use that to finally go out and contain and defeat China. That's what this is all about. This has been, and Elbridge, sort of a partner of A. Wes Mitchell, is Elbridge Colby, grandson of Bill Colby, the former CIA director. Colby's big on that too. He said, our threat's China. We got to deal with China. So in a way, Russia is sort of a sideshow to what is this broader strategic thinking of the deep state. And, Trump's oblivious to it, but Lavrov's not, and Putin's not. They understand.
They do. Listen, in the last few minutes that we have here, what comes next? Because what's being talked about next is a bilateral meeting between Zelensky and Putin. They're still trying to figure out where that might be. And then a trilat to also include Trump. But it sounds to me like we're a long way from getting anything done here, yet the Russians seem to be willing to talk about it. How do you see it?
Yeah, no, they'll talk. But the meeting between Putin and Zelensky is not going to happen until the negotiating teams for both Ukraine and Russia come to agreements, and that it's going to be effectively a surrender by Ukraine. There's nothing that Russia's going to back up. Russia's not going to give back any of the territory that it currently occupies that has been legally incorporated into Russian Federation under Russian law. Now, people say, oh, that's illegal under international law. Okay, take your international law and blow it out your nose. The reality is
nobody seems to follow that on either side of this line. If I can just say, it is a might makes right situation, both in the West and in the Russia right now. It's just how we're having it. You can argue against that. But you're talking about the territory there. It seems to me that the only thing Russia would be willing to do was to say, we'll withdraw from the toehold we have in Sumy and that territory in the two different places in the Kharkiv Oblast, Dnipropetrovsk, etc. But then, as you said earlier, and I think this is I think it's a non-negotiable for the Russians. Tell me if you think differently, that all of the administrative borders of all four of those oblasts are not even up for negotiations for their term, meaning they're not going to freeze the line in the southern two oblasts and let Ukraine keep the other two, which would seem to mean either there has to be a surrender by the Ukraine side or the war will just keep going on. How do you see it?
Yeah, no, the war's going to keep going on. That's what I say. I've maintained all along, this is not a stalemate. This is not a frozen conflict, and Russia's not losing. The advantages are piling up for Russia with each passing day, and they're under no time constraint. People keep pretending like this is, it's the fourth quarter and there are only 2 minutes left of the game. They got to hurry up and finish. And if I hear another one of these generals like Ben Hodges or Jack King talk about, oh, look, Russia's only taken 19% of Ukraine in 3.5 years. Hey, bozo, how did we do in Afghanistan? after 21 years. Okay?
Oh,
Shut up.
you got to go there.
No American has any room to talk anymore about our military prowess when a bunch of goat herders in Afghanistan kicked our ass. Okay? And we don't like to admit it, but they did. And we ended up creating a well-armed army that didn't exist before in Afghanistan.
Yeah, and you've mentioned several times also that the territory is almost a second, maybe needed almost. It is a secondary operation for the Russian side, but the destruction of the Ukrainian armed forces is their primary objective. And they may have only taken 19% in 3.5 years, but if those numbers are even close to being right, that have been allegedly hacked into, then there has been some profound cost to the Ukraine side.
Exactly right. And it is, as you know, far better than I, by virtue of your service, that the strength of a military is always dependent upon the quality of its soldiers.
100%. So last question here. Do you think that Zelensky will agree to a meeting with Putin if Putin agrees to it?
No. He'll be signing his death warrant. And Putin's not going to go meet Zelensky anywhere outside of Russia. So if there's going to be a meeting, it's going to be a meeting of surrender. They don't, like I said, they don't have anything to negotiate on. It's not like Ukraine. The only thing Ukraine can say is, we're going to completely divorce ourselves from the West. He's not doing that. That's his.
So what about Zelensky saying, okay, I'm going to play the tough guy. I'm going to go ahead and meet him, and I'm going to come in there with all my demands. You're going to do X, Y, and Z, even though Russia says we're only going to do A, B, and C. Is that a possibility? So you got the two guys meeting, but it turns into a February in the Oval Office kind of situation.
Yeah, no, I don't see that happening at all, because again, Zelensky can make all the demands he wants. Russia's got the upper hand. Russia's army is now up to 1.3 million. Zelensky's only able to field barely 300,000 now in Ukraine. So it's just the numbers are working against them.
And so what do you say to people who say, okay, well, if those numbers are accurate, if one side has 1.3 million, the other side only has 0.3, why wouldn't they just roll them up, in short order?
Well, one, they're trying to minimize casualties on the Russian side. So they're not going to go putting people out if they can continue to press until they collapse. The collapse will come at some point. But again, we ought to ask ourselves the same question, that if we're so great militarily, why weren't we able to stop the Houthis? If we're so great militarily, why didn't we take complete control and lock down all of Afghanistan? So it's, the Russians they've got their own timetable. I don't pretend, the general staff doesn't call me up and ask me for a briefing.
That's too bad, because I was going to ask, but
so.
Well, listen, we'll certainly just continue to keep an eye on this and continue to watch and continue sending folks to sonar21.com, because they don't have to wait till the next time you're on our show here. They can go and read all about your stuff as it's happening in real time. Appreciate you coming on today, as always, and looking forward to the next one.
Thanks, man.
All right. We appreciate you guys too. Be sure and like and subscribe if you haven't done it yet. And just as another reminder to share with your friends that we're on podcasts. I know a lot of folks actually prefer to get their information just on the pod, because they can put it on the background. I've never understood that. I've never liked those particularly, but some people love them. So we're going to make sure that they have them available. So we have there the podcast. We also have on the written format there with DanielDavisDeepDive.substack.com. So that you can pass that along to your friends too. Make sure that they know what's going on there, because however they like to get it, we have it available here so that they get access to the same uncompromised and open, honest stuff that you get here. Make sure they get the same opportunities. Thank you very much, folks. We'll see you probably this afternoon at 3:00. I'm going to do an update on the tactical situation. Since the last time we talked, there's been a lot of things happening in Pokrovsk, and the Ukraine side has made some counterattacks. The Russian side has made some responses, and we're going to see what does the net of all this, and where are we now of all these diplomatic opportunities here. Thank you very much. We'll see you this afternoon at 3:00 on the Daniel Davis Deep Dive.